This is the very beginning of the text. It settles like a pebble dropped into a deep lake, sending concentric rings outward through still water you did not know was so wide. That first ripple is an invitation to lean closer, to watch as the surface refracts what lies below. In that watching, something shifts. The title, a bold claim that your energy is about to shift forever, is both prophecy and practical instruction. Prophecy because it points toward an unseen unfolding that feels inevitable, and practical because the moment you attend to it, you begin to participate. Imagine the body and mind not as fixed machines but as an orchestra, long rehearsed in the habits and tonalities of a life, waiting for a new conductor to raise a baton. The conductor is not a foreign master but an inner attentiveness that learns to hear different harmonies. The instruction to watch before sleep is not superstition. It is an ancient technique reframed by modern understanding. The final gaze before the threshold of sleep acts like a scribe sealing a page, a neuronal signature pressed into the clay of the night's dreaming, shaping how the mind will rehearse its next day. It is the seamstress at the hem of consciousness, stitching waking intent into the fabric of unconscious reweaving. There is a geometry to energy that we rarely see. We walk through our days under the tyranny of visible causes, calendars, deadlines, physical ailments. Yet beneath those lies a scaffold of charge and resonance. The self is a pattern of waving currents, attention, belief, emotion, breath, and the quiet humming of the nervous system. These currents organize experience by attracting certain forms, like magnetic lines pulling iron filings into shapes. Change the field, and the filings arrange differently. To speak of energy shifting forever is not to promise an unbroken upward spiral or to deny the storms that will come. It is to suggest a recalibration of the underlying field such that storms are navigated with a different compass. Old feedback loops can fall away, and what felt like fate can become a pliable landscape. The strange and beautiful thing is that the machinery that resists change is also the machinery that enables it. The repetition of habit produces both inertia and the very neural patterns that, when gently rearranged, reveal new possibilities. There is a transitional geometry to dusk and dawn that mirrors the inner threshold. The liminal time just before sleep is a doorway where the mind naturally loosens its grip on the rigid narratives of daytime selfhood. Images drift, logic thins, associative pathways open like tributaries melting into a river. This is the hour when your attention acts as alchemist. A single thought placed there, sincere and resonant, can ferment into a new architecture of being by morning. Watch before sleep is an instruction to become deliberate about the last impressions you offer your deeper mind. Consider the ancient practice of incubatory dreaming, where one seeks answer or healing by entering the dream intentionally. Modern neuroscience has given this a companion language, the consolidation of memory and the role of REM and hypnagogic states in recombining experience. Yet the metaphysical truth that accompanies the science is older and more capacious. There is an archetypal economy at work, a law of resonance, which teaches that attention is a currency. What you spend before sleep buys the dream your deeper self will have. That dream, in turn, seeds the waking patterns you carry into the world. To frame this in practical terms, think of your energy as a garden with a very particular microclimate. The gardener's last acts, the watering at dusk, the choice of which seeds to cover determine the first shoots that greet the morning. When you begin to orient the end of your day toward intention instead of exhaustion, you alter the microclimate. You stop fertilizing the same invasive weeds of self-criticism and fear, and you begin to stake the tender vines of curiosity and courage. The effect is cumulative. Small, consistent changes in what you notice, how you speak to yourself, and the rituals you perform before sleep can unfurl into tectonic personal shifts. There is nothing mystical about repetition. It is the only way deep structures change. But there is also nothing trivial about the choice to be intentional. It is the hinge upon which both mundane improvement and profound transmutation swing. At another level, this shift is also a recalibration with the cosmos. The word cosmos itself means an ordered whole, an arrangement where every part participates in the harmony of the whole. Human energy is not a closed system. It dialogues with planetary rhythms, social fields, and the unseen networks of collective mind. When your frequency changes, it subtly alters the field around you, like a tuning fork causing nearby forks to resonate in sympathy. This is the reason why personal transformation often appears to coincide with shifts in one's relationships, career, or health. The invisible architecture that once held everything together in a particular pattern is being retuned. The universe is not punishing nor rewarding, it is responding. The change you cultivate before sleep is like a small, steady signal beamed into the web of being. Over time, resonance catches and the outer world rearranges to match the new internal frequency. There is also an existential element. To accept that energy can shift forever is to accept that identity is not a finished product. Many people live as if character were marble, unyielding and carved. But identity is closer to a living sculpture, co-created by the breath of attention, the hands of habit, and the clay of circumstance. To say your energy is shifting forever is to reclaim agency in the deep sense, the authority to shape the tone of your inner life and thereby the texture of your outer world. This is not a naive promise of permanent happiness, but a mature invitation into responsibility. The responsibility to steward one's inner climate with the same care one might devote to a child, a garden, or a craft. When you accept the role of steward, the small acts of watching before sleep become rituals of sovereignty. They are the quiet coronations of a new regime of being, enacted nightly. Finally, there is a tenderness in the idea of watching before sleep. It asks you to become gentle with the threshold, to meet it with curiosity rather than force. The energy that shifts forever is not seized, it is invited. It responds to attention that is kind, clear, and steady. So breathe, listen, and place your last thought as deliberately as one might lay a lantern on a dark path. The light you leave there will be what guides the dream, and the dream will be what guides your waking step. This is the opening stanza of a long, intimate song, one whose notes are the rhythms of breath and habit, whose chorus is the resonance of your attention echoing into the field. If you are willing to watch, to plant your last gaze with reverence, the lake of your life will remember the pebble, and the ripples will never stop unfolding. We have already let the pebble fall and watched the first concentric circles slide outward into the dark water. Now, to understand why a nightly gaze can tilt the axis of your being, we must trace the architecture beneath that ripple, the invisible scaffolding of attention, habit, and resonance that holds the world in place. Consider your life as a city at dusk, lights flickering into coherence as the sun withdraws. Each light is a habit, a memory, a tone of feeling. What we call energy is simply the aggregate glow of those lights, and to say that energy will shift forever is to suggest that you have the maps and the keys to who turns those lights on. The first deep idea here is that attention is not neutral. It is currency and sculptor both. Where you place it, you fertilize form. The mind that watches before sleep is the mind that reallocates its attention from the random market to deliberate cultivation, and in doing so it changes the topology of the inner city. This is not mystical wishful thinking, but a practical understanding of neurometabolic economy. Neurons that fire together wire together, and the last thought held before sleep is an emissary to the unconscious, an order sent through the night to build particular structures in the morning. Closely intertwined with attention is story, the endless narrative machinery through which the ego weaves a sense of continuity and safety. The stories that occupy the threshold hour are often the thin veils between illusion and deeper truth. We tell ourselves tales of scarcity, unworthiness, and inevitability, because stories create maps, and maps create routes that the psyche follows unquestioningly. Yet story is also a tool of liberation if wielded with craft. Stories recast the meaning of events, transmute wounding into lesson, and organize the chaos of experience into a coherent song. The practice of watching before sleep offers a chance to rewrite the closing stanza of your day's story, to choose the tune that will play as your consciousness migrates into dream. The falsities of permanence and separation lose their pitch when the last song is one of connectivity and possibility. There is a law at play that often goes unnoticed. Rhythm governs change. The universe moves through cycles: breath, heartbeat, moon phases, seasons, the oscillation between waking and dreaming. To align with these rhythms is to flow with a current rather than against it. When you make the act of watching before sleep a rhythmical practice, you anchor within a larger cadence that the self can trust. This anchoring calms the nervous system and opens channels for integration. It is an ancient principle disguised as insomnia or superstition. The fold of time in which you close the day's ledger and invite the dream is a liminal corridor where the fabric of cause and consequence thins. In that corridor, the patterns you seed, intention, gratitude, release, are received by the deeper intelligence that organizes assimilation, healing, and growth. Another fundamental idea is that change is alchemical rather than transactional. We often approach energetic work as if turning a dial will flip us from one setting to another, expecting linear outcomes. But the true process is subtler. It more closely resembles the slow transmutation of lead into gold, where patient attention and subtle shifts co-create new alloys of being. Watching before sleep functions as a nightly alchemical furnace, where the day's raw materials, grief, desire, boredom, joy, are exposed to heat, catalyzed by attention, and subtly recombined into refined character. The promised forever shift is therefore less a sudden binary and more an accumulation, a series of tiny recompositions that alter the electromagnetic signature of who you are. Over time, these microalchemies reorganize relationships, attract different circumstances, and recode habitual reactions. The outward consequences appear miraculous only because we are unaccustomed to noticing the slow seams at which life changes. Parallel to alchemy is the relational law of resonance. What you emit finds sympathetic strings in the world. Energy is not contained. It extends like a field, a humming lattice that touches other fields and sets them vibrating. A nightly practice is therefore an act of broadcasting, a quiet tuning fork placed near the bed of the world. There are those who resist this metaphor, fearing that it implies passivity, merely humming and hoping the universe will answer. But resonance is not passive, it is invitational. Your chosen frequency calls forth complementary patterns. This is why the quality of your last held thought, its generosity or its bitterness, matters profoundly. The world responds to the tone, not the content, and the ripple effect is real in relationships, creativity, and opportunity. It is an echo of the ancient maxim, as within, so without, like a mirror that reflects the face you hold close to it. Beneath all of these is the ever-present dance between control and surrender. The paradox of the threshold is that true sovereignty is not achieved through strangulation of the unknown, but through wise surrender. To steward one's inner climate is not to command every breeze. It is to build good harbors, to know when to hold fast and when to let go. Watching before sleep cultivates discernment, discerning which thoughts deserve the throne of attention and which are mere transient weather. There is liberation in releasing the need to orchestrate every outcome, and there is empowerment in choosing what to nurture. The tension between these poles sharpens the capacity for action during the day and softens the grip at twilight, allowing change to occur without frantic force. Moreover, we must not overlook the shadow as a guiding pillar. The fragments we deny by daylight gather for their audience at night. When the light recedes, suppressed feelings, Unintegrated patterns and unresolved dialogues show their faces. Watching before sleep provides a pale lantern to meet these aspects without turning away. Seeing the shadow is an exercise in compassion, a necessary step toward wholeness. When we greet those parts with curiosity rather than judgment, we decompress their power to haunt us, and instead we enfold them into an expanded sense of self. This process alters the energetic signature because unexamined ghosts drink energy. Recognition returns that energy to the host. Finally, underlying all of these pillars is a pragmatic humility, the recognition that inner work interfaces with outer systems. Your nightly practice is not an isolated ritual in a vacuum. It participates within sociocultural rhythms, economic structures, and the feedback loops of relationships. Thus, the practice must be both mystical and mundane, poetic and pragmatic. Intentions without action become airy. Rituals without reflection calcify into superstition. The true potency of watching before sleep emerges when attention, story, rhythm, alchemy, resonance, surrender, shadow work, and pragmatic integration cooperate like instruments in an orchestra. Each one supports the integrity of the whole, and together they form the scaffold upon which your energy can indeed shift in ways that feel permanent. In understanding these guiding pillars, you are not handed a formula but invited into an art, the artful tending of your interior city, the conscious composition of the song that will accompany your slip into the dreaming world. When your practice harmonizes with the hidden architecture of change, the shift is less an improbable miracle and more an inevitable unfolding of alignment. There is a tale of a city that slept on the back of a whale. The whale moved slowly through an ocean that was neither water nor air but a velvet current of time. The city's people called themselves the Watchers, though in truth they were the watched. They believed the whale carried them through the dream weather, and they, in turn, fed the whale with their light. In the evenings they would climb the whale's ribs like staircases and stand at the windows carved into its skin, chanting small inventories of memory, names of lost lovers, recipes, the color of their first morning. These inventories were not mere nostalgia. They were offerings that shaped the whale's path. One generation began to notice that when their offerings were full of fear, the whale's route bent toward sharp shoals and nights of storm. When offerings were quiet wonder, the whale sailed into luminescent bays where the stars hung below the horizon and the city's shadows became gardens. A young watcher, curious about the pattern, learned to do something else. Rather than merely listing their memories, they would fold them into a small paper boat and place it on the whale's breath. The boat was made of attention, carefully noticing each thought as if it were a lantern, and the act of folding was a vow to meet the memory without armor. That night the whale did not change course dramatically. Instead it exhaled differently. The currents around the city softened, and the watcher felt their footsteps leave lighter echoes on the whale's ribs. The story reveals a quiet law. How we frame and fold what we hold before sleep alters the carrier of our journey. It is not that the world outside rearranges at once. Rather, the vessel that bears us through the inner ocean shifts its tone, and the resonance of that tone becomes the architecture of future mornings. Another parable unfolds in a village that had a lighthouse without a lantern. For years, sailors passed by whispering that the place was cursed or enlightened, depending on the hour. The keeper of the lighthouse, an old woman with a mouth like a map of rivers, would climb the spiral stairs every night and sit in the lantern room with a small, breathing clock. She did not light a flame because she believed light could not be given unless it had been asked for. Instead, she wound the clock and listened to its steadiness, and in the listening she synchronized her heartbeat with its tick. Sailors who found themselves near would share tales of how, when they drifted close enough, an invisible column of quiet steadiness reached out from the lamp room and nudged their compasses into alignment. A young sailor once challenged the keeper, demanding why she did not strike a visible beacon. She replied, smiling, that many lighthouses blind you with urgent signals that demand immediate action, whereas the kind of guidance they needed was the kind that rearranged the inside of the sailor. The steadying of the hand on the tiller, the unwrinkling of fear into attention. When the sailor asked what to do when storms blew up, the keeper simply said to learn the rhythm of the clock and let it move inside you before the mast breaks. This allegory reminds us that the pre-sleep practice is a lantern room, where the flame is not always brightness but steadiness. The recalibration of rhythm is sometimes a subtler act than the flaring of intention, but its consequences are no less navigational. There is a quieter fable about a gardener who tended a field of mirrors. Each mirror showed a facet of the gardener's face at a particular time of life: eyes young and unbecomingly fierce, hands older and tender, the mouth of a child. For years, the gardener swept the mirrors at dusk, polishing away smudges and ignoring the cracks. One season, a storm came and shattered several panes, scattering jagged reflections across the soil. The gardener expected grief, but instead found that the shards planted themselves like seeds. Strange vines grew. They bore lanterns that contained no brightness until night, and when the gardener lit them, they revealed images layered upon images, moving like fish through water. In the dawn, the gardener realized the field was not broken but reconfigured. Each shard allowed a new intersection of self to exist: shock and softness, shame and song, without demanding integration at once. This garden taught the gardener how to sit with fragmentation, to water it with curiosity rather than repairs. The lesson here is tender. Energy shifts do not require the impossible edict of wholeness overnight. They happen when fractured parts are acknowledged and cultivated as possibilities. Shadow work in this tale is not an exorcism but a horticulture. Finally, there is the myth of the seamstress who learned to stitch time. She owned an old cloak that smelled of tides and lullabies, but every morning it felt heavier on her shoulders, laden with yesterday's arguments and propaganda. She attempted to wash it clean in a river of forgetting, but the cloak would always return with stains reborn. At last she discovered a different method. Each evening before sleep she took out a spool of thread spun from intention, a needle forged of gentleness, and made a single stitch at the hem, no more, no less. The stitch was not meant to mend the cloak in bulk. Its purpose was to mark the seam between her waking and sleeping selves. Over months, the hem accumulated a tapestry of tiny stitches. One night she woke to find that the cloak no longer weighed her down. A seamline had formed, subtle as a thought. When the seamstress crossed it, she felt a gentle rearranging inside, as if her history and future had become colleagues in a room instead of adversaries. The story is a whisper about limits and repetition. The enormity of transformation is often less like a single heroic cut and more like the patient making of seams that honor thresholds. The stitches were small, but through their persistence they created a lever by which large doors could be nudged. These narratives braid into one another like constellations sharing a single mythic sky. Each allegory teaches a facet of the nocturnal choreography. The whale shows how the carrier of our life responds to the quality of our offerings. The lighthouse explains the stabilizing power of practiced rhythm over dramatic illumination. The garden reveals the alchemy of tending fractured selfhood. The seamstress demonstrates the leverage of tiny, repeated thresholds. Together they peel back the curtain on what it means for energy to shift forever. Forever, in these stories, does not imply instant permanence but the reordering of relation, how we meet memory, how we steady our heartbeat, how we garden our fragments, how we sew the seam between day and night. The final image is of an orchestra tuning itself not to a single loud note but to a shared interval. The players learn each other's breathing, and in that learning the music changes. It becomes a habit of harmony, a terrain the musician can walk upon even when the world outside is storm. Such is the alchemy that occurs in the small rooms before sleep. Ritual, attention, surrender, and the patient stitch-making of intention conspire to tilt the axis of your inner world. The tales do not promise miraculous erasure of difficulty. They instead invite you into the kind of stewardship that makes a gradual, enduring shift possible. In the hush between these stories, listen for the whale's breath, the lighthouse's steady tick, the garden's lanterns, and the seamstress's needle, each a symbol, each a method, each a call to learn the art of changing from the inside out. The whale's slow, cavernous breath becomes, in the realm of day-to-day living, nothing mystical and everything practical, a reminder that your nervous system answers first to rhythm before it does to reason. When you allow the inhale and exhale to be measured with intention, 10 slow counts into the belly, 11 out as a release, or a four-fold box breathed with a steady metronome, you are not merely performing an exercise, you are resynchronizing the orchestra that runs your waking life. This is not a prescription written on a temple wall, but a small act of stewardship you can enact at your kitchen table, in a car, or before a meeting. Over time, those breaths form a habitable climate inside you. Anxiety that once sounded like a siren becomes a tide you can ride rather than a storm that overwhelms. The whale teaches that large shifts in energy often begin with modest recalibrations of the breath, and those recalibrations translate into clearer thinking, steadier nerves, and a quieter mind at dusk. From the lighthouse's steadiness, we take rules for scaffolding the day. Rhythm is not punishment but architecture. Set simple beat markers across the day. The ritual of waking with a glass of water warmed by your hands, a 5-minute stretch that honors the spine, a midday pause that is not plea but promise to yourself. These become the lighthouses that steady your passage through each hour. In practice, this may look like arranging your calendar to include a buffer between demanding tasks, aligning meetings into blocks that respect deep work, or establishing a nightly hour where screens are dimmed and a lamp's gentle glow replaces artificial glare. Such structural choices ebb away the frantic fragmentation that steals energy. They buy you coherence. Over weeks, these rhythms are no longer imposed chores, but familiar docks where your attention can land, be refueled, and set sail again. The garden's work, tending, pruning, composting what no longer bears fruit, translates to the careful curation of what you allow into the soil of your life. This is where practical hygiene meets metaphoric medicine. What you read, who you converse with, the foods that enter your body, even the music that underlays your afternoons. To shift energy forever is to become intentional about intake. It's a day-to-day economy of attention where you learn to say no without drama and yes with gravity. Create small rituals that return you to center. A gratitude list each night that fingers the day's gifts. A quick sweep of your inbox where you discard unnecessary noise. A weekly call to someone who nourishes you rather than drains. These do not promise instant elevation, but they change the composition of your inner soil so that new growth, calmer moods, a clearer sense of purpose, less friction in relationships, becomes natural rather than forced. The seamstress's work, those patient stitches, teaches the power of cumulative microhabits. You do not need a monumental overhaul at once. You need a series of thresholds you can cross daily. Make 3 small promises you can keep each morning, one to your body, one to your mind, and one to your spirit. Perhaps the promise to the body is 10 minutes of walking outside. The promise to the mind is a page of free writing, and the promise to the spirit is lighting a candle and sitting with a quiet breath. Keep these promises, and the seam between who you are and who you intend to be becomes less frayed. Where once your will felt like a muscle that would burn out, it now grows resilient through regular, tender use. These stitches also mend how you meet disappointment. When plans unravel, you have a practice seam to return to, a ritual that reorients rather than collapses. Practical energy work is not only inward, it extends outward in subtle but profound ways. In relationships, the lighthouse teaches steadiness. Arrive predictably, speak with less reactivity, Create ritual times of connection rather than allowing intimacy to be weather-dependent. In the workplace, the whale's calm breath helps you negotiate from a place of centeredness, reducing the escalatory patterns of stress that eat attention and energy. The garden's curation invites you to compost toxic obligations and plant what aligns with your values, even if that means tenderly letting go of opportunities that look shiny but hollow. These adjustments recalibrate your social field, which in turn influences how much energy you retain and where it flows. Sleep, the liminal room where much of this alchemy deepens, deserves practical tending. Build a pre-sleep liturgy that signals to your body the descent from the day. It could be as simple as dimming lights an hour before bed, taking a warm shower, journaling 3 sentences about what you learned, and breathing through a body scan. Remove blue light, lower temperatures, and invite scents like lavender or cedar that anchor your nervous system. The seamstress's patience reminds you that the aim is not perfect sleep on night 1, but a growing intimacy with the habit of rest. Over time, the cumulative effect is dramatic. Dreams become clearer, awakenings less jarring, and your morning energy no longer feels like a scrape but a welcome. Energy shifts also show up through the work you do, how you allocate your hours to tasks that require depth versus those that demand breadth. Carve time for deep creative work when your internal lighthouse indicates high clarity, and let administrative tasks occupy your lower energy windows. This is simple alchemy. By aligning task type with natural cycles of attention, you conserve energy that was previously squandered on misaligned effort. Add to this a practice of review. Once a week, sit with the garden and assess what thrives and what does not. This reflection is not navel-gazing but strategic tending. It allows you to prune what drains, water what nourishes, and plan where to plant next. Lastly, remember that shifting energy forever does not mean achieving some uninterrupted bliss. It means creating enough internal and external scaffolding so that when life storms come, you do not lose the architecture that sustains you. Begin with breath, scaffold with rhythm, tend your garden, sow steady microhabits, and translate these practices into the way you work, love, rest, and move through the public world. These are not miraculous prescriptions but methodical, patient acts that re-enchant the everyday and in doing so, change the quality of your life. In the steady echo of these practices, your energy will do what whales, lighthouses, gardens, and seamstresses have always taught us. Shift, not as a spectacle but as a slow, beautiful re-education of how you inhabit yourself. Imagine, for a moment, the final hush before sleep as a kind of ceremonial threshold, a narrow bridge woven from the last golden sliver of sunlight, your breath, and the soft hum of whatever you have tended throughout the day. It is here, in this liminal pocket between doing and being, that the permanence of the shift is most likely to be born, not as a thunderclap, but as a rearrangement of furniture in the house of your awareness. All the paths we trace together, those first glimpses of the shift, the scaffolding of practices, the symbolic maps that tie whale song to lighthouse beams and gardens to seamstresses, converge now into a single, luminous proposition, that your energy can be reoriented through patient attention, ritualized receptivity, and the willingness to be changed by what you learn to honor. This is not a promise of constant exaltation. It is a promise that, given sustained tending, your interior climate will change its predominant weather. Storms will come and storms will pass, but the architecture you build, stone by small stone, will hold. As you lie down, feel the weight of the day as material to be reshaped. Notice how each breath carries a filament of memory and possibility, how the exhale can become a gentle eraser, softening the rigid outlines of the self you carried through the afternoon. Allow that erasure to be an act of kindness rather than defeat. You are not losing yourself but making room. In that space, it becomes possible to ask new questions of your life, to reroute habitual energies into roots that nourish and astonish. The transformation we invite is not a one-night miracle. It is a curriculum of small returns. The lighthouse becomes more reliable not because it burns brighter from one instance, but because its keeper, night after night, trims the wick and listens to the sea, learning how to time the flash with the turning of tides. You are both the keeper and the sea. When we spoke of hidden laws and ancient frames, of the patterning that sits beneath modern chaos, we did so to remind you that you are nested within a larger intelligence. The threads of your life weave through astronomical cycles, ancestral memory, and the microscopic choreography of neural pathways. Each is a language you can learn to read. The moon does not consult your calendar before it waxes. Still, your rituals can be timed to honor her pull. The whale does not explain its song, yet you can attune yourself to the frequencies that resonate with your deeper moods. To master the art of sustained energy shift is to become a translator between these languages, moving with them instead of against them. Consider how the metaphors we used, gardens that require pruning, seamstresses stitching new seams, lighthouses calibrating their beams, are not fanciful flourishes but tools. Use them in the dark. Let them be mnemonic anchors that resurface at 2 a.m. when doubt creeps back in. Transformation refracts into the practical through habit, rhythm, and consent. The micro-habits you agreed to try, an evening pause, a weekly audit of what waters you, a lengthening of your breath, are not moral demands but technical adjustments to the machinery of attention. They serve to rewire what you default toward when under stress. This is subtle work. It asks you to be patient with small victories and uncompromising in compassion toward setbacks. The paradox is that the most decisive changes are often the least dramatic to the world. A single, deliberate pause before responding becomes a different governance of time. A practiced breath that resets the nervous system becomes an instrument of sovereignty. Over months, these tiny recalibrations compound into a different felt sense of the self, less brittle, more spacious, more calibrated to the rhythms you care about. Do not mistake this invitation for a retreat into solipsism. The shift in individual energy radiates outward. It reconfigures relationships, reshapes how you labor, and alters the pattern of choices you enact in public. When you tend your inner garden, you do not merely grow flowers for yourself. You alter the microclimate for everyone who enters your space. A calmer presence is contagious. A steadier voice rewrites how conversation happens. This is why the work of private ritual is a civic act. The world is not changed by charisma alone, but by the steady diffusion of people who have learned how to steward their own energies. You become, in your small ways, an emissary of new possibility. If you find yourself resisting this, note that resistance is a form of care, misplaced, perhaps, but meaningful. It signals attachments that have yet to be honored or fears that want a listening ear rather than forced dismissal. Invite those resistances to tea. Ask them what they protect and what they fear losing. The seamstress of your life can then stitch without tearing the original fabric. She can add a new panel that honors the seams already present. This is the work of integration, the humane practice of change that preserves continuity while permitting evolution. Consider now the image of night as a rehearsal. Each dusk is an invitation to dream with your eyes open and to test the contours of the possible before you surrender to sleep. The habit of a nightly watching, a mindful witnessing of the self as it relaxes, primes the mind for different narratives. It sets the stage for a quieter, deeper cognition where intuition is less interrupted by the static of reactivity. Over time, dreams begin to reflect the reoriented energy. They carry more coherent symbolism, more regenerative landscapes, and sometimes startling clarity. Treat these nocturnal insights as data, not prophecy. Ask them what they are trying to teach you, and then translate their language into small, practical experiments the following day. Above all, remember that permanence in inner climate is a craft, not a perfunctory destination. It asks for repetition and tenderness, for the courage to be unglamorous in one's devotion. The metaphors we use throughout this journey, whale song, lighthouse, garden, seamstress, are companions on the path, reminding you that change is at once wild and domestic. You are invited to be both curator and participant, to keep the lamp trimmed, to sing into the ocean, to plant another row in the garden, to sow the next seam. Each act confirms that the world is more malleable than it appears, and that your energy, once aligned, becomes a steady instrument of creation rather than a fickle weather vane. So, in this last breathing room before sleep, I offer you a simple experiment. Set a small intention that honors what you have learned. Let it be a gesture as humble as remembering to exhale fully 3 times, and as ambitious as committing to a weekly audit of what drains and what sustains. Carry this intention to bed like a talisman. Let it rest beside you while you sleep, and when dawn softens the world open again, receive the reflection in the morning light with curiosity rather than obligation. This is how the shift becomes durable, not through heroics but through a patient re-education of how you inhabit yourself. If you allow that patient work, if you keep returning to the small, luminous practices, your energy will rearrange itself. It will find new routes through old habits, uncover reservoirs you thought were dry, and like the ocean reshaping the shoreline, it will leave behind a coastline that looks different from the one you departed. Rest now into this possibility. Breathe as if you were drawing the stars inward and exhaling a light that will return to you in steadier form. Tomorrow will begin as it always does, but you will be slightly different at the hinge between night and day. Quieter in some places, braver in others, and more faithful to the slow, exacting work of being alive. In that small difference lies the forever shift.